The golden moons of Eridra cast their withered light upon the ancient amphitheater, illuminating the crimson sand of the sacred beast arena. The air hung heavy with anticipation, filled with the collective breath of thousands who had gathered to witness the most important ritual of the Karan royal tribe, the trial of the divine feline. Princess Selene stood at the entrance tunnel, her slender fingers tightening around the ceremonial spear. 16 cycles of life had passed since her birth, and tonight would determine whether she was worthy of the throne. Her platinum hair, braided with strands of heritage metals, fell in a complex pattern down her back, signifying her royal lineage. "Remember," whispered her mentor, an elderly woman whose face was mapped with ritual scars. "Show no fear. The beasts sense weakness." Selene nodded, keeping her face impassive, despite the turmoil within. The crowd's murmur swelled as she stepped into the arena, her bare feet sinking slightly into the sand. 6 ornate gates surrounded the circular space, each bearing the symbol of an ancient house of Karan. The high priest raised his staff, and silence fell across the arena. "Tonight, Princess Selene of House Karan undertakes the sacred trial of the divine feline," his voice echoed. "As has been our way since the first landing, royal blood must prove itself worthy through courage and skill. Let the trial begin." A deep gong resonated through the amphitheater. Selene assumed the traditional stance, spear angled forward, feet positioned precisely as she had practiced for years. One by one, the gates began to rise. From each opening emerged a feral feline, massive beasts, with iridescent scales covering their muscular feline bodies. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural blue light, evidence of the neural locks that kept them under control during the ceremony. Each beast stood twice Selene's height, with claws that could tear through metal, and jaws powerful enough to crush stone. The ritual was simple, yet brutal. Navigate among the beasts, demonstrate control, and emerge unscathed. No royal had been killed in 3 generations. The neural locks ensured the beasts would never strike with full force, merely testing the candidate's courage and agility. Selene began the ceremonial dance, her movements fluid and precise. The crowd watched in approval as she gracefully maneuvered between 2 of the creatures, her spear touching the ceremonial points on their flanks. The beasts responded as expected, circling her with controlled aggression. Then everything changed. A sickening crack echoed through the arena as one of the beast's neural locks malfunctioned. Its eyes shifted from controlled blue to a wild, feral crimson. The crowd's collective gasp was deafening as the creature's demeanor transformed instantly. "Neural lock failure." "Evacuate the princess," shouted the Beastmaster from his elevated platform, frantically working his control panel. But it was too late. The beast roared with unrestrained savagery and lunged toward Selene. She barely managed to roll aside, feeling the rush of air as massive claws swept through the space she had occupied a heartbeat earlier. Panic erupted in the stands. Royal guards readied their weapons but hesitated. Their projectiles might hit the princess in the chaos. The other 5 beasts, sensing the disturbance, became agitated, their neural locks struggling to maintain control. Selene's training deserted her. The ceremonial spear, designed for ritual rather than combat, bent uselessly against the beast's scales when she attempted to defend herself. Terror gripped her heart as she realized the true extent of her peril. "Help me!" she screamed, an instinctive cry that broke every protocol of the royal trials. A princess was never to show weakness, never to call for aid. Yet in that moment of pure fear, Selene had invoked the ancient law of cry for help, a nearly forgotten provision that allowed anyone, regardless of status, to respond to a life-threatening situation. Time seemed to slow as the malfunctioning beast reared up for a killing blow. Selene saw her reflection in its dilated pupils, saw her own death approaching. A whistling sound cut through the chaos. From high in the observers section, where the lowest-ranked citizens and even exiles were permitted to witness but never participate, an arrow flew with impossible precision. It pierced the soft spot at the base of the beast's skull, the one vulnerability in its armored hide, and buried itself deep. The creature froze mid-strike, its massive form teetering for a moment before crashing to the ground, mere inches from Celine's feet. The arena fell into stunned silence. All eyes turned toward the source of the arrow. Standing at the highest tier of the amphitheater was a hooded figure bow, still raised in the aftermath of the shot. The guards immediately surrounded the individual weapons drawn. "Who dares interfere with the sacred trial?" demanded the high priest, his voice trembling with outrage. The guards forced the hood back, revealing a man with features unlike any Koran. His skin was darker, his eyes, a color not seen among their people. The mark of exile, a branching scar pattern, had been burned into his cheek. A human, an off-worlder, one of the few permitted to live on Eridra under strict conditions. The princess invoked the law of cry for help, stated the arena's ancient legal advisor, stepping forward reluctantly. This exile responded. By our oldest laws, his action was permitted. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Celine stared at the stranger, her heart still racing from her near-death experience. The implications were dawning on her and everyone present. By saving her life, this exile had created an unbreakable bond. According to Karan law, the life debt could not be dismissed or ignored, even by royalty. "The trial is invalid," announced the high priest, his voice cold with fury. "Princess Celine has failed to complete the ceremony independently. Furthermore, she has formed a blood bond with an exile and off-worlder. She is hereby stripped of her royal status and right of succession." Celine stood frozen as her world collapsed around her. In the span of moments, she had gone from heir to the throne to an outcast. The crowd's shocked whispers grew into a roar of confusion and outrage. Royal guards approached her no longer with deference, but with cold formality. "Former Princess Celine, you are ordered to surrender your royal insignia and leave the capital by dawn," the guard captain announced. "The exile who intervened will be escorted from the city immediately." "This is absurd," Celine finally found her voice. "I would have died. Are our traditions worth more than the life of your princess?" "Former princess," corrected the high priest. "And yes, some principles stand above individual lives. That has always been the Karan way." As guards led her from the arena, Celine caught a final glimpse of the exile who had saved her. He was being roughly handled, his bow confiscated. For a brief moment, their eyes met across the distance, his expression unreadable, yet somehow resolute. That night, as Selene gathered the few possessions she was permitted to take, a soft knock came at her chamber door. She opened it to find Mira, her most loyal handmaiden, looking frightened. "My lady," Mira whispered, "they plan worse than exile for you. I overheard the council. They fear your return with off-world support could threaten their power. They intend to ensure you never leave the desert alive." Cold dread settled in Celine's stomach. "And the exile who saved me?" "Already taken to the eastern gate. They will release him into the Crimson Wastes, without supplies." Celine made her decision instantly. "Help me reach the eastern gate before dawn." Draped in a commoner's cloak, Celine slipped through the shadowy streets of the capital. The great domes and spires that had been her home for 16 cycles now loomed ominously above her. Every guard post caused her heart to race, but Mira had chosen their path carefully. They reached the eastern gate just as the first hints of dawn colored the horizon. A small group of guards stood watch as a solitary figure was being processed for expulsion into the desert. "You cannot go with him," Mira pleaded. "The Crimson Wastes mean certain death." "Staying means certain death as well," Celine replied. "At least in the wastes I have a chance." She pressed a small communication device into Mira's hand. "If I survive and find a safe haven, I'll contact you. Tell only those you absolutely trust." With a final embrace, Celine pulled her hood lower and approached the gate. She had timed her arrival perfectly. The changing of the guard created momentary confusion that allowed her to blend with a group of early morning traders. The exile was being roughly pushed through the small pedestrian door beside the main gate. Celine slipped through behind him, ignoring the startled look from a junior guard, who quickly averted his eyes, unwilling to question a departure. Once outside the city walls, Celine hurried to catch up with the exile, who was already striding purposefully into the desert, despite having no provisions. "Wait!" she called out when they were far enough from the gate. The man turned surprise evident on his weathered face when he recognized her. "Princess, what are you doing here?" "Not a princess anymore thanks to you," she replied, then immediately regretted her sharp tone. "And also alive, thanks to you." The exile studied her for a long moment. Up close, Celine could see that he was older than she had initially thought, perhaps 30 cycles, with lines around his eyes that spoke of harsh experiences. His exile mark was relatively fresh, the branching pattern still angry and red against his skin. "You shouldn't have followed me," he finally said. "The wastes will kill you." "The council would have killed me more certainly," she countered. "I had no choice." He sighed, looking back toward the city, then out to the vast expanse of the crimson wastes. "Do you have any supplies? Water?" Celine produced a small pack from beneath her cloak. "Some water-dried provisions, a basic medical kit. Not much." "It'll have to do." He gestured toward the distant mountains that shimmered in the heat haze. "There's a hidden valley beyond the eastern range where exiles sometimes gather. It's at least a 10-day journey, and most don't make it." "And you know the way?" A grim smile crossed his face. "I've heard stories. Never thought I'd have to test their truth." "I don't even know your name," Celine realized. He hesitated before answering. "Eli. On Earth I was called Eli." "Why were you exiled Eli of Earth?" His expression darkened. "That's a story for another time. Right now, we need to move. Once they discover you're gone, they'll send searchers." As if to emphasize his point, a distant alarm began to sound from the city. Celine felt a momentary pang for the trouble Mira might face, but pushed the thought aside. They had to focus on survival now. The first day in the Crimson Wastes taught Celine how sheltered her royal life had been. The twin sons of Eridra beat down mercilessly, turning the red desert into a shimmering furnace. Her lightweight palace clothing, though practical for the climate-controlled royal quarters, offered little protection here. Eli tore strips from his own tunic to fashion a head covering for her, protecting her from the worst of the sun's rays. "Your skin will burn faster than mine," he explained. "You're not adapted to this level of exposure." They traveled through the morning hours, seeking whatever meager shade they could find when the suns reached their zenith. As evening approached, bringing marginally cooler temperatures, they resumed their journey. "How did you come to be at the arena?" Celine asked, as they walked partially to distract herself from her parched throat and aching feet. Eli kept his eyes on the horizon as he answered. "All residents of the capital are required to attend royal ceremonies, even exiles. I was assigned to the highest tier as far from the royal presence as possible." "But you had a bow. Weapons are forbidden to exiles." A slight smile crossed his face. "I'm resourceful." "And an exceptional shot," Celine added. "No Quran archer could have made that shot from such distance." "On Earth I was," he hesitated, "trained in certain skills." Celine sensed there was much more to his story, but didn't press. They had more immediate concerns. The distant howl of a desert predator reminded them of the dangers that emerged after dark. "We need shelter for the night," Eli said, scanning their surroundings. "There!" He pointed to a formation of red rocks that jutted from the desert floor about half a kilometer away. The rock formation proved to have a shallow cave on its leeward side, offering protection from both the elements and prying eyes. As Celine gratefully sank to the ground, Eli busied himself setting basic traps around their perimeter arrangements of loose stones that would rattle if disturbed. "You've survived in the wild before," Celine observed. "Different wilderness, same principles," he replied carefully, rationing their water. He handed her a small portion. "Drink slowly, just enough to wet your mouth." Celine obeyed, though her body craved more. "The valley you mentioned, what do you know of it?" Eli settled across from her, his back against the cool stone. Only rumors. They say a group of exiles discovered a hidden valley decades ago where underground springs create a habitable environment. They've built a community of sorts away from Karen control. Is that possible? The Council maintains that no one can survive in the wastes long term. The Council maintains many convenient fictions, Eli said dryly. It's in their interest that people believe exile equals death. Celine considered this. All her life, she had been taught that the traditions and rules of Karen society were absolute and infallible. Now cast out for surviving an accident, not of her making, she was beginning to question everything. Rest, Eli advised, interrupting her thoughts. I'll take first watch. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded Celine. The unfamiliar sounds of the desert night, combined with the day's traumatic events, kept her mind racing. From her position, she could see Eli's silhouette at the cave entrance, vigilant and still. "Why did you do it?" she finally asked. "Why risk yourself to save me? You must have known the consequences." For a long moment she thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was quiet but clear. "Where I come from, we have a saying, the measure of a society is found in how it treats its most vulnerable members. I watched for months as your people celebrated rituals of power and dominance. When I saw you in genuine peril, I couldn't stand by and watch. Not again." "Not again." Celine picked up on the pain behind those words. Eli turned to face her, his features mostly hidden in shadow. "Get some sleep, princess. Tomorrow will be harder than today." He was right. The second day brought new challenges as they ventured deeper into the wastes. The terrain grew more treacherous with shifting sand dunes, giving way to fields of sharp volcanic rock that cut through their footwear. Their water supply dwindled alarmingly fast in the punishing heat. By midday, they spotted the first search party, a skimmer hovering above the desert floor, about 2 kilometers north of their position. Eli pulled Celine into the shadow of a rock outcropping as the vehicle swept past. "They're using thermal scanners," he whispered. "These rocks should mask our heat signatures temporarily, but we need to be more careful." "How can we avoid them? They have technology and resources we don't." Eli considered for a moment. "We need to be unpredictable. No straight lines. We'll travel at night when the thermal difference between bodies and the cooling desert will make detection harder." That night brought a new terror, a sandstorm that rose seemingly from nowhere, engulfing them in minutes. Eli quickly fashioned a shelter, using his cloak and a shallow depression in the lee of a dune. They huddled together as the world disappeared in a maelstrom of howling wind and abrasive particles. "Put this on!" Eli shouted over the storm, handing Celine a piece of cloth. "Cover your nose and mouth." Inside their makeshift shelter, the noise was deafening. Sand found its way through every opening into eyes, ears, and clothing. Celine found herself pressed against Eli's side, grateful for his solid presence in the chaos. Hours passed before the storm finally abated, leaving them half buried in a new landscape of shifted dunes. They emerged coughing and disoriented to find the desert transformed. Their carefully plotted course was now meaningless in the altered terrain. "The storm may have helped us," Eli said, brushing sand from his hair. "It will have covered our tracks and confused the search patterns. If we can figure out which way to go," Celine countered, turning in a circle to get her bearings. Eli pointed to the night sky where Aridra's 3 moons and unfamiliar constellations shone. "The hunter's bow still points east. That's our direction." Celine marveled at his knowledge. "You've learned our stars. When your life might depend on navigation, you study what guides are available." He shouldered their meager pack. "We should move while it's cool." By the 4th day, dehydration had become their most pressing concern. Their water was nearly gone, and Celine's royal complexion had turned painfully red, despite the protection Eli had fashioned. Her lips were cracked, and walking became increasingly difficult. "There should be a seasonal water channel ahead," Eli said, though Celine detected uncertainty in his voice for the first time. "If we're fortunate, the northern mountains may have had rainfall recently." They weren't fortunate. The channel was bone dry, its bed cracked and dusty. Celine sank to her knees, despair threatening to overwhelm her. Perhaps the council was right. Perhaps exile is just a slower form of execution. Eli knelt beside her, his own exhaustion evident in the slump of his shoulders. Yet, his eyes remained determined. "We haven't come this far to give up, Princess." "Stop calling me that," she snapped. "I'm not a princess anymore. I'm nothing." "You're alive," he countered. "As long as that's true, you have a chance to become something new." A distant mechanical hum interrupted their conversation. Another search skimmer, closer this time. They had no cover, no place to hide in the exposed channel. "Run," Eli urged, pulling her to her feet. They sprinted along the dry riverbed, seeking any deviation or branch that might offer concealment. The skimmer grew louder, almost upon them. Suddenly, Eli stopped short. "There!" He pointed to a narrow fissure in the channel wall, barely visible unless one was looking directly at it. "Go." Celine squeezed into the opening, finding it widened into a small cave. Eli followed his broader frame, barely managing to fit through the entrance. No sooner had he cleared the opening than the skimmer passed overhead, its searchlight sweeping the channel. They pressed deeper into the cave, away from the probing light. The temperature dropped noticeably as they advanced, and a familiar scent reached Celine's nostrils. "Water," she whispered. The cave opened into a larger chamber, where, incredibly, a small pool of water gleamed in the dim light, filtering from above. They approached cautiously Eli, testing the liquid, before allowing either of them to drink. "It's safe," he confirmed. "An underground spring." They drank sparingly at first, then refilled their containers. The discovery renewed their spirits and their chances of survival. The seasonal channel must connect to an underground water system, Eli theorized. "If we follow it eastward, we might find more access points." Celine nodded, then paused as something caught her eye at the far end of the chamber. "Eli, look." Scratched into the cave wall were markings, deliberate symbols that Celine recognized as an ancient form of Karen script. "Can you read it?" Eli asked. "Partially. It's old ceremonial writing. I think—" She traced the symbols with her finger. "I think it's directions, a map to the valley." Hope surged through them both. The markings, when deciphered, indicated a path through the eastern range, a treacherous route, but one that promised sanctuary on the other side. Their journey grew more arduous as they approached the mountains. The terrain became increasingly vertical, with narrow paths winding through razor-sharp rocks. Twice, they had to backtrack when faced with impassable crevasses. Their progress slowed dramatically. On the seventh day, disaster struck. As they navigated a particularly narrow ledge, the rock beneath Celine's foot crumbled. She slipped, a cry of terror escaping her, as she began to fall toward the jagged rocks 30 meters below. Eli's hand shot out, catching her wrist with bone-crushing force. For a terrifying moment, they both teetered on the edge. Then, with a tremendous effort, he pulled her back to safety. They collapsed on the path, breathing heavily. When Celine looked up, she saw blood soaking through Eli's tunic at the shoulder. "You're injured," she gasped. He grimaced. "Reopened an old wound, it's nothing." But, as she insisted on examining the injury, Celine discovered it was far from nothing. A deep gash had torn open, likely from the strain of catching her. Without treatment, infection in the harsh conditions would be inevitable. "We need to find shelter and tend to this," she insisted. Eli reluctantly agreed, and they located a suitable overhang as dusk approached. Celine used their precious water to clean the wound, then applied the limited medical supplies from her pack. "Where did you get this injury originally?" she asked as she worked. Eli's jaw tightened. "From your royal guards during my capture." Celine's hands stilled. "You never told me why you were exiled." He looked away, focusing on the darkening sky. "I interfered with another Karen tradition. A mining community was using child laborers in dangerous conditions. I objected." "Violently?" Celine asked softly. "I removed the children and disabled the equipment. No one was seriously hurt, but I destroyed property and challenged authority. On Aridra, that's enough. Celine finished bandaging his shoulder, her mind processing this new information. The children, what happened to them? Returned to their families with the mining operation temporarily halted. But I have no illusions that things changed permanently. That night, as Eli slept fitfully, Celine kept watch. She studied his face, seeing it differently now. The exile mark seemed less a brand of shame and more a badge of honor. The final portion of their journey through the mountain pass proved the most challenging. Eli's injury slowed them considerably, and their supplies dwindled to almost nothing. The path narrowed to barely the width of a foot in places, with sheer drops on either side. On the 9th day, they heard the unmistakable sound of pursuit, the whine of smaller scout drones designed for the difficult terrain of the mountains. They're persistent, Eli muttered, his face pale from pain and exertion. The council fears what I represent, Celine replied. A royal who has seen the truth of their rule. They pushed forward desperately, but the drones were gaining. At a fork in the path, Eli made a swift decision. Take the right fork, it follows the map directions. I'll take the left and draw them off. No, Celine grabbed his arm. We stay together. Princess Celine, he corrected himself. You need to survive. You're the one who can eventually challenge the system. Not without you, she insisted. Your knowledge, your different perspective, that's what Karin needs. The debate became academic as 3 armed guards appeared on the path behind them, accompanied by hovering drones. They had been found. Surrender now, the lead guard called. By order of the High Council. Eli stepped forward, positioning himself between Celine and the guards. She's under my protection by the law of cry for help. You have no authority here. The guard's expression hardened. The law doesn't apply to traitors and exiles. This is your final warning. Run, Eli whispered to Celine. When I move, run and don't look back. Before she could protest, Eli lunged sideways, drawing the guard's attention, and fire. Energy bolts sizzled past him as he dove for cover behind a boulder. Celine hesitated for only a second before following his instruction, sprinting down the right fork. Behind her, she heard the exchange of fire and Eli's shout of pain. Tears blurred her vision as she ran, certain she was leaving him to die. The path wound through increasingly narrow defiles, until suddenly it opened onto a view that stole her breath. Below, nestled among the mountains like a hidden gem, lay a valley of impossible green. Structures had been built into the natural topography, and she could see the glint of flowing water. The Valley of Exiles, it was real. Celine's moment of wonder was shattered by a pained grunt. She turned to find Eli stumbling toward her, one arm clutching his side, fresh blood staining his clothing. Eli, she rushed to support him. The guards won't be following. He managed as breathing labored. Triggered a rock slide, blocked the path. With Eli leaning heavily on her shoulder, they began the descent into the valley. They had barely covered half the distance when figures emerged from below, climbing rapidly toward them. Celine tensed, ready for another fight, but Eli shook his head. Look at their markings, not Karen military. The approaching group proved to be valley residents, exiles like themselves, alerted by the commotion above. They quickly took charge, supporting Eli and guiding them down to the settlement. The valley was more extensive and established than Celine had imagined. Dwellings had been carved into the cliff faces, or constructed from local materials. Water flowed freely from several springs, supporting gardens and small agricultural plots. Most surprisingly, she saw feral beasts similar to those from the arena, but without neural locks, coexisting peacefully with the human inhabitants. We've been here for 3 generations, explained Lyra, one of the elders who welcomed them. What began as a desperate refugee camp has become a true community. Eli was taken to the medical center, a well-equipped facility that belied the supposed primitive conditions of exile. Celine remained by his side as a doctor. Another exile treated his wounds. He'll recover, the doctor assured her. Though he's lucky to be alive. The blast caught him peripherally. A direct hit would have been fatal. For 2 weeks, Celine barely left the medical center, watching over Eli as he healed. During that time, she learned more about the Valley community. Many were political exiles like themselves, people who had challenged current traditions or authority. Others were off-worlders who had run afoul of the strict regulations. Together, they had built something remarkable. "We trade secretly with outer settlements," Lyra told her during one visit. "Medical supplies, technology, information. Not everyone in the capital agrees with the council's methods." When Eli was finally well enough to leave the medical center, they were assigned a small dwelling overlooking one of the valley's streams. That evening, sitting outside watching the sunset paint the cliffs in shades of amber and gold, Celine voiced the thought that had been growing in her mind. "We can't just hide here forever, not when Quran continues under the council's rule." Eli studied her with a knowing expression. "I wondered when you'd say that." The trial of the divine feline, the rigid caste system, the exile policy, they're all means of control, not tradition, Celine continued. "I was raised to perpetuate that system. Now I need to help dismantle it." The Valley elders might not agree. They found peace here away from Karen politics. "Peace built on secrecy is always vulnerable," Celine argued. "What happens when the council eventually discovers this place? And they will someday." Over the following months, Celine immersed herself in Valley life learning skills she had never needed as royalty farming, building, conflict resolution without hierarchical authority. She worked alongside former enemies, finding common ground and shared purpose. Most importantly, she observed how humans and beasts cooperated in the valley. The feral felines without neural locks displayed intelligence and gentleness that contradicted everything she had been taught about their savage nature. "The neural locks don't control aggression," explained a former beast handler who had been exiled for questioning methods. "They create it. The technology stimulates pain centers to make the creatures aggressive for spectacle." This revelation hardened Celine's resolve. With Eli's support, she began gathering allies within the valley who shared her vision of a reformed Karen society. Not everyone was convinced. "We left that world behind," argued one elder during a community gathering. "Why risk everything we've built?" "Because others continue to suffer under the system that exiled us," Celine countered. "And because this paradise exists on borrowed time. The moment the council discovers it, they'll destroy it unless we change the council first." Gradually, support for her plan grew. A year after their arrival in the valley, Celine stood before the assembled community, outlining her proposal. "We won't return with weapons or violence," she explained. "We'll return with truth, with evidence that the council's most fundamental teachings are lies, with proof that another way of living is possible." The plan was daring in its simplicity. A delegation would return to the capital during the next trial of the divine feline, now only months away. They would bring with them feral beasts from the valley, untamed yet gentle, and reveal the truth about the neural lock technology. "To succeed, we need inside help," Eli pointed out. "The capital's defenses are too strong for a frontal approach." Celine smiled. "I've been in contact with Mira through the communication device. She's built a network of sympathizers within the palace." Preparations consumed the following months. Training the feral beasts for the journey, establishing secure communication with allies in the capital, planning routes that would avoid detection. Celine worked tirelessly, but never alone. Eli remained constantly at her side, his strategic mind complementing her understanding of Karen politics. Their relationship had evolved into something neither had anticipated. From rescuer and rescued to fellow exiles, to partners in revolution, and finally, to something deeper. In the valley, away from the rigid structures of Karen society, they had found a connection that transcended backgrounds and worlds. The night before their departure, standing at the edge of the valley, under a canopy of stars, Eli took Celine's hand. "Whatever happens tomorrow, know that saving you was the best decision I ever made." Celine smiled, remembering the terrified princess she had been. "And following you into exile was mine." Their return journey to the capital was strategically timed to coincide with the preparations for the next trial. Security would be focused inward on the arena rather than on the city perimeter. With the help of Mira's network, they infiltrated the city in small groups disguised as traders and pilgrims. Celine, her once platinum hair now dyed a common brown, entered through the western gate with Eli and two handlers accompanying the gentlest of the valley's feral beasts, sedated and concealed in a covered cart. The capital had changed little in their absence, its gleaming spires and ancient domes still projecting permanence and power. Yet, Celine saw it now with different eyes, noting the inequities she had previously overlooked the fear beneath the surface order. They were guided to a safe house in the artisans' quarter, where Mira awaited them. The reunion was emotional, tinged with both joy and apprehension. "The new candidate for the trial is your cousin, Princess Vanna," Mira informed them. "She's been groomed to replace you, but she's young, only 14 cycles. There are whispers of discontent even among the loyal houses. And our access to the arena? Arranged. The Beastmaster's second assistant is with us. He'll ensure your beast is substituted for one of the ceremonial 6. That night, as final preparations were made, Celine addressed their assembled allies, a diverse group of citizens from all levels of Karan society. "Tomorrow we challenge not just the council, but centuries of tradition. Some will hate us for it. But truth, once revealed, cannot be easily forgotten. Whatever happens, we have already won by creating this alliance across boundaries that were supposed to divide us forever." The arena looked smaller than Celine remembered, viewed now from the Beastmaster's control platform rather than the sand floor. Disguised as technicians, she and Eli monitored the preparations as the stands began to fill with spectators. "Neural lock calibration complete on 5 subjects," reported the chief technician. 6 beasts showing anomalous readings. "Expected fluctuation for a new specimen." Their allied assistant smoothly intervened. "I'll supervise final adjustments personally." Below, the royal procession entered the arena. The high priest, the council members, and, finally, young Princess Vanna, looking far more terrified than determined as she clutched her ceremonial spear. "She's just a child," Celine whispered, momentarily questioning their plan. "She won't be harmed," Eli assured her. "Our beast is the gentlest of all, but her trial will certainly be educational." The ceremony began, as it had for generations. The high priest's invocation, the solemn gong, the rising gates. 5 neural-locked beasts emerged, their eyes glowing the artificial blue that signified control. Then came the 6th, their beast from the valley eyes, clear and natural movements calm and measured. The crowd murmured in confusion. This beast behaved differently. No aggression, no controlled stalking. Instead, it simply sat in the center of the arena, watching Princess Vanna with evident curiosity. The young princess approached cautiously, spear extended, as she had been trained. The beast remained still, even as she touched the ceremonial points. The audience's confusion grew louder. "Now," Eli whispered. Celine stepped forward, removing her technician's disguise. "People of Karan." Her voice, amplified by the arena's acoustics, rang out across the suddenly silent crowd. "I am Celine, once your princess, now returned from exile to reveal the truth." Guards moved immediately to apprehend her, but Eli and their allies blocked their approach to the control platform. "The beasts you fear, the creatures used to test royal worth, are not naturally violent," Celine continued. "Their aggression is artificially induced by the neural locks. The trial of the divine feline is built on deception." She gestured to the beast below, still calmly seated despite the commotion. "This feral has no neural lock, yet shows no aggression. In the valley where exiles have built a new society, humans and ferals live in harmony." The council members were on their feet shouting orders for her arrest, but their voices were lost in the growing tumult from the crowd. Across the arena, other allies revealed themselves, unfurling banners that proclaimed truth over tradition. "For generations you have been told that power comes from domination," Celine called out. "That royal worth is proven through control of the beasts. But true leadership comes from understanding, cooperation, and compassion." Below, a remarkable scene unfolded. Princess Vanna, perhaps responding to the genuine nature of the unlocked beast, had lowered her spear. The creature gently nuzzled her outstretched hand, a moment of connection that sent gasps through the audience. "The council has used fear to maintain control," Celine continued. "Fear of the beasts, fear of exile, fear of change. Today we show you there is another way." At that moment, the arena doors burst open. In strode more valley exiles, accompanied by additional feral beasts, all walking calmly, without restraints or neural locks. The crowd drew back in initial terror, then watched in astonishment as the creatures behaved with gentle dignity. "This is blasphemy," the high priest shouted. "Guards, arrest the traitors." But many of the guards hesitated, witnessing the contradiction of everything they had been taught about the ferals. Some even lowered their weapons. Celine seized the moment. "I challenge the council not with violence, but with truth. I propose a new beginning for Karan, one where leadership is earned through wisdom and compassion, not dominance and fear." The crowd's response was initially uncertain, then building pockets of applause, growing into widespread support. Years of suppressed questions about the rigid traditions were finally finding voice. The high priest, seeing control slipping away, made a desperate move. He seized Princess Vanna, holding her as protection from the encroaching beasts. "Stay back or the girl suffers." It was exactly the wrong action. The contrast between his cruelty and the gentle behavior of the supposedly savage beasts could not have been more stark. Even his loyal supporters looked shocked. Eli, who had made his way down to the arena floor, approached slowly. "Let her go. Your tradition is ending today, but it doesn't have to end in violence." For a tense moment, it seemed the high priest might choose a final, desperate act. Then Princess Vanna, showing unexpected courage, stomped hard on his foot and wrenched herself free. She ran directly to the nearest feral beast, which positioned itself protectively between her and the high priest. The council's authority collapsed in that moment. Guards throughout the arena lowered their weapons or switched sides. Citizens who had entered as spectators became participants, surrounding the council members, not with violence, but with the irresistible force of unified purpose. As the sun set on that historic day, temporary governance was established, a coalition of former exiles, progressive nobles, and citizen representatives. The neural locks were removed from all captive beasts, revealing their true, gentle nature. The prison cells were opened, releasing those whose only crime had been questioning tradition. Celine, standing with Eli atop the council platform, now a place for open address, rather than closed decrees, addressed the gathered citizens. "Today marks not an ending, but a beginning. The path forward will not be easy. Centuries of tradition cannot be undone in a day. But together, we will build a society based on truth, cooperation, and compassion." She reached for Eli's hand, drawing him forward. "This man once saved my life with his last arrow. In doing so, he set in motion events that have saved all of Karan from the prison of false tradition. Let his action remind us that sometimes the greatest courage is in challenging what everyone accepts as unchangeable truth." The crowd's response was thunderous, not the orchestrated approval of former ceremonies, but the genuine support of people glimpsing a new possibility. That night, as temporary peace settled over the capital, Celine and Eli returned to the small dwelling they had been assigned. Tomorrow would bring the hard work of building new systems, new traditions. But tonight allowed a moment of quiet reflection. "Do you think it will last?" Eli asked, gazing out at the city lights. Celine considered the question carefully. "Not without effort, not without vigilance. Every generation will need to renew the commitment to truth over comfortable lies." "Then we'd better get started on the next generation," Eli said, with a smile, drawing her close. Celine laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. The old Celine would have been scandalized by such a suggestion. And the new Celine? She looked into his eyes, seeing the same courage that had drawn a bow against impossible odds to save a stranger. "The new Celine believes in taking risks for what matters," she replied, closing the distance between them. And this definitely matters. In the years that followed, Quran transformed. The rigid caste system gave way to a more fluid society where contribution, rather than birth, determined one's place. The trial of the divine feline evolved from a test of dominance to a ceremony of partnership where candidates demonstrated their ability to understand and work alongside the beasts. The Valley of Exiles became a center of learning and innovation, its connection with the capital now open and celebrated. Trade with other worlds expanded as Karin's reputation shifted from isolationist to collaborative. Not all embraced the changes. Some traditionalists formed enclaves where older ways were preserved, but they were given the freedom to do so, provided they extended the same freedom to others, a principle that became central to the new Karin philosophy. Celine and Eli never took formal titles, preferring to serve as advisors to the new Council of Voices. Their greatest work was in education, ensuring that future generations understood both the value and the danger of tradition, how it could preserve wisdom or perpetuate control. On the 10th anniversary of what came to be called the Revelation Day, they stood once more in the arena, now transformed into an open forum. The ceremonial spears had been replaced by lecterns, the sand floor by gardens, where humans and ferals mingled freely. 10 cycles ago, I stood in this arena as a princess, certain of my place and my truth. Celine addressed the gathered citizens. I was saved by an arrow from a stranger, and that salvation led me to question everything I had been taught. Today, I am neither princess nor exile, but simply a citizen of a Karin I am proud to serve. Eli stepped forward to join her. And I came to Eridra as a stranger, became an exile, and found a home in challenging the status quo. If there is wisdom in our story, it is this: compassion is not weakness, questioning is not disloyalty, and sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected sources. Their son, a child of both worlds, with his mother's platinum hair and his father's earthborn features, ran to join them on the platform. Around the family, the ferals lounged peacefully, living symbols of the change that had swept through Karin society. Celine looked out at the faces, human and beast, native and off-worlder, young and old, and felt a deep satisfaction. The arrow that had saved her life had ultimately saved much more. It had shattered the chains of tradition and opened the way for something new to emerge, a society built not on fear and control, but on understanding and cooperation. In the fading light of Eridra's twin suns, she whispered the phrase that had become Karin's new guiding principle: truth over tradition, compassion over control, and hope, always hope over fear.